Alright. Welcome back, everybody. A patch has come out, and I've been strangely silent on it, hiding my head to avoid the criticism of the community, because for those who don't know, I'm part of the Balance Council. Patch came out, it's been hugely controversial, people are losing their minds, partially with good reason, partially without. Let's talk about it. So first of all, people are very emotional and angry, and reading through so many comments over the last few days, I've been overwhelmed by how many pieces of misinformation are being spread, confusion, and then there's like mixtures of very correct information mixed in with completely wrong information. And it's hard to sort through for me, and I'm kind of on the inside of the balance process, right? So for anyone else, I imagine this is an absolute garble of chaos that is very hard to figure out right now. A big part of this all stems from the Balance Council's communication sucking balls. There is no better way to say it. It is the worst communication from any game dev in the world. And the reason is, the Balance Council is not a game dev. It's a bunch of volunteers in the community who just don't do that good a job at communicating. And they did an even worse job a year ago. I even made a whole video about it, complaining about how bad the Balance Council process seems to be. Looking from the outside, I'm now part of the Balance Council, so we're gonna circle around and touch back on that a little bit later in the video and why the communication's so bad and how it can get better, because that's a really big part of what's going on right now. So first of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should we say the broom Roomba cyclone car of death in the room. The cyclone, it's a big complicated change with far-reaching side effects. I've already done videos talking about how I wasn't the biggest fan, and I started to feel like, look, even though they're adjusting it and nerfing it from its initial state where it was very broken, it still feels like it's not going to go through. And it did, and I was a little bit shocked. I was like, oh my god, have I not been keeping up? This made it through. I didn't think this was going through. So that was my bad for anyone who had been saying that too. It did end up going through, and many are calling it a massive buff to the Cyclone. I think those people don't realize it's been nerfed since the early videos that came out. The Cyclone is nowhere near as strong as it was. I mean, if we just hop over here, for instance, so the Cyclone, initially, it was 120 hit points. It also, it's had its armor reduced as well. They fiddled with a few things, but most importantly, its damage is not as high as it was, and it's specifically buffed versus mechanical rather than armored, because it was a bit of a menace against roaches in Zerg vs Terran, and now it is no longer so super OP against the roach. So the Cyclone did change from a lot of the videos which people watched in the early days from Hero Marine and myself, and I think a lot of people don't realize it is a little bit weaker than that, so it's not as strong as that initial version. Also, apparently one of Hero Marine's videos, the Cyclone was bugged as well. I don't know exactly how, but apparently, basically some of the footage that a lot of people are thinking of when they think of the Cyclone is not exactly the same as what's actually out on the ladder right now. That being said, I still don't like it. The Cyclone is complicated. There's so many far-reaching effects that this can have by changing this unit, and there was nothing wrong with the old Cyclone. I like big, dangerous changes. I've barracked for these in the past. However, we are changing so many other things, and changing this Cyclone, I think, is very complicated. Harstam said it's weak at high level right now, so it's not a balance problem in his mind, but it does seem like it could be frustrating for low and mid-level players where there's going to be easy to execute, Cyclone spamming, all-in builds, and you kind of need to learn how to deal with this new difficult thing that may plague the ladder for a month or two. I kind of agreed with this, and I've actually potentially been blowing this out of proportion, saying I think it's going to be really hard, but I've been asking for a lot of replays from Zerg specifically of players losing to this, and I have had very few, so I don't know if the community is just too lazy to post replays or not. I've done a video on how to help open Robo to make it very easy as Protoss to just basically shut down all of the silly Cyclone cheeses everyone's doing right now, and it's just one of the most solid PvT openings. But in Zerg vs Terran, I haven't actually seen a lot of evidence of it being that hard to stop. I've had a lot of mid-level Zerg players saying, oh man, I lost a lot of MMR the first day, but by day 2, day 3, I'm actually on top of it and I'm not struggling against the Cyclone anymore. If you have examples that beg to differ, please send me your replays so I have more actual things to look at when I do make that video trying to help Zerg players out fight against the Cyclone. The bigger impact with the Cyclone, in my opinion, rather than it being potentially poor gameplay experience for low-level players, is the fact that you can build this off a reacted factory. And that could have a lot of far-reaching side effects. And I don't know if any of these are actually going to be true, but so far, a few things I've heard from pros, my own experiences in the community, is the Cyclone can deny the Adept Scout at the start very easily and pushes back Protoss vision, number one. Number two, the Cyclone destroys Adepts in a fight. They just can't do anything versus it because it never gets hit. So you need to go Stalkers. So it's already kind of limiting a few of the options of Protoss. People are saying Phoenix openings are weaker because you can build those Cyclones so easily to mobile, kind of move around and defend those Phoenix. Likewise, Cyclone Marine medevac pressures are apparently a little bit harder for Protoss to stop in the early game. The old Cyclone people would do that, 2 Cyclones, a medevac, a Viking, a pack of Marines. Now, apparently with the new Cyclone, that's even a little bit harder to stop. We've also got Zerg players who rely on having their overlords all outside around their bases to give them a ring of vision for safety. Those overlords are getting pushed back by a normal reactor Hellion opening, building just a single cyclone and cleaning up overlords much easier. Jason tweeted this actually. Here we go. He said, I'm not complaining because this directly benefits me and Terran players, but it seems very likely every 1 to 2 base Zerg all in just became 100 times easier to hold. LOL. I just have to pop 2 cyclones out of the factory that already is sitting on a reactor. Was this intended? But yeah, that combined with all those other changes, there are potentially far-reaching consequences. So for me, the reason I don't like this cyclone is not because it's necessarily overpowered, but it's just a big complication. Right now, the main goal of this patch is, of course, to try and make PvT better and more stable for Protoss especially, as well as touching on a few different areas. And this does make it very complicated and hard to read into that. Now, that being said, because I don't feel it's that broken, even for low-level players right now, I'm not saying worst change of all time. I personally did not, I kind of, voted to not have it in the patch. I wish it wasn't there specifically, but at the end of the day, I don't know if it's the end of the world, but I heavily have my eye on it for all those features I just mentioned, and if any of those start blowing out of proportion and give even a small consistent advantage to Terran in the early game, or limit the options of Zergs and Protosses in that early game, then I think it may be a negative for the game. And that's why, much like Harston, we both agree, we kind of wish the Cyclone just wasn't in there. There's too many potential problems that can come out of this unit, and it was an unneeded change in our opinions. I don't want to speak for him. That's what he said in his video. Go check that one out as well, of course. All right, so everyone's talking about PvT. What is no one talking about? Because that Cyclone, that's all anyone talks about. Cyclone, it's the Cyclone patch. This is one of the biggest, most drastic patches we've had in years. And there are 3 very impactful changes to PvT no one's talking about because everyone's complaining Cyclone got buffed. Like I said, I'm not sure it's any better than the old Cyclone. It might be, it might not. I really don't know. It's going to take time to see. But the bigger thing is EMP has been nerfed. Ghost Snipe has been nerfed, but that doesn't really matter in PvT too much. Interference Matrix now needs an upgrade. Every game I've seen Clem play, he doesn't have Interference Matrix on his Raven. It's just for spotting detection, detection of invisible units and dropping auto turrets. You've also got a big change to the Immortal. The Immortal Barrier actually blocks the first instance of damage. For those who don't know, this is super useful versus EMP or a siege tank shot. Why? Because what used to happen is the EMP, you'd run forward with your Ghost, EMP the Immortals, you hit 3 Immortals with an EMP, it knocks all their shields off, and it activates the barrier, which by the time the fight starts has already turned off because it only lasts for 2 seconds. So you're effectively getting double value on Immortals in the last patch with EMPs. Siege Tank Shot would likewise set off the barrier and do 70 damage to the shields as well with its direct damage. That is no longer the case. So the Immortal has a big buff. Terran build orders don't get Interference Matrix for free with these speedy Ravens that they got in the last patch, and EMP is a little bit weaker. These are big changes that are so fantastic, and I wish people would talk more about them because I love all of these changes, and I think they'll be really impactful at high level. There is, though, another change in here, which is starting to get a big negative press. A few people talking about it, and myself talking about it a lot. I am a little worried about the Disruptor. We already feel like PvT armies aren't the most amazing in late game, and the Disruptor now has +1 supply. Going from 3 to 4 supply, it's a pretty big increase in terms of that supply, and when you're maxed out, as a Protoss player, you already feel kind of like you're often less efficient than the Terran in most of the game, and we ran into some matches in the show match the other day with Max Bax and Clem where he's at like 85, 90 probes, and he's got 6 Disruptors, and his army looked tiny. Like, it looked like there was just nothing there because he's got 25 supply in Disruptors, 85 to 90 supply in probes, and you got a few Zealots doing a run by, and you've got like 1 Colossus and 8 Stalkers, and you're maxed out. So don't get me wrong, is this the most massive change? Well, yeah, basically this does nerf heavy Disruptor play, which is a big part of late game PvT. And as much as I think all the pros are like, hey, we think it's more interesting when it's not just 10 Disruptors throwing balls out, you got to be careful because taking the power level away from Protoss in the late game, is that something where it's like, okay, EMP's nerfed and this other stuff, but we're going to take this other thing away? It's hard to do the mental arithmetic on who comes out on top when you're giving things, you're taking something away from Protoss, but then you're also taking, what I would argue is a lot more things away from Terran. A lot of players are going, well, you're taking anything away from Protoss, therefore this patch is evil, it's meant to help Protoss versus Terran, but you're taking things away. So I think people, don't get me wrong, this change has me a little worried. I've got my eye on it for late game, but I think people are also looking at this just on surface value and saying, if you take anything away from Protoss, it's bad. It's bad for us overall as a patch. And that is simply not the case. I am, like I said, a little worried about it. I'm hoping this comes out with balancing out that matchup a little bit more, because the matchup has been favored for Terran recently in terms of results. And don't come at me with your arguments that all the good Protoss players retired. A lot of them came back. There's a lot of great Protoss players out there. And to have a game with asymmetric balance, you simply have to have players of all races and matchups doing very well. It is no coincidence that Hero won a GSL, was winning a lot of tournaments. This patch, this map pool came out. The Raven starts building faster. The maps are a little bit bigger with a bit more dead space behind the bases, which is kind of repeated in this current map pool. And suddenly Hero is not really able to win many tournaments in PvT especially. You can point out he makes mistakes, which he does. That's another thing. People said, well, look at Classic. Every time he loses, look at Hero, look at MaxPax. They make so many mistakes. And I always say, have you guys ever watched a game of Starcraft? Everybody makes mistakes. Fucking everybody makes mistakes. The difference is the Protoss are losing their tournament lives because of those mistakes. There are simply more chances to lose the game in the current state of PvT especially. That's something we don't want to make Protoss infinitely stronger. We just want to give them a little bit of a buff. And that is a clearly stated goal in the patch notes for anyone who doesn't know. That is like one of the overall goals right at the very top of the patch notes. Let's go take a look at that. It says, make Protoss more stable on a professional level in the early game versus Raven pushes, and more able to fight Terran mid to late game armies without solely relying on disruptors. No one is disagreeing on this in the Balance Council or outside, but there are so many different moving pieces in this patch. I can understand why people are confused. Is this actually good enough of a change? And time will tell. We should know within a few weeks to a month if Protoss is just getting their ass kicked and beaten around left, right, and center. The patch has not succeeded. But it's very hard to know until then. And part of the reason for that, I've talked about this before, is there hasn't been an extensive amount of testing. It's very hard to get a lot of testing. Even years ago, PTRs going up and all sorts of things. Most high-level players will not do a lot of testing because they have other tournaments to play. And unfortunately, even though there are players like Harstem and a few others who've played hundreds of games on the patch and watched hundreds more, there's a lot of players I've talked to, like Cyril, like Rainer, like MaxPax, like Clem, who have barely played the patch. And it's the same for most of the Korean players as well. So this is one of the problems we're running into in terms of testing and the Balance Council. To give you guys a peek behind the curtains, I don't think I'm breaking NDA or any secrets by this. It's hard for us to know if it's working or not. And do you know why? We don't have access to enough games. There's not enough people playing it. We need like 10 more Wardy Balance tournaments, preferably at least one every week, for there to be proper meta establishing, players practicing it, players learning and iterating, and the meta getting figured out, and us really seeing these changes in effect. So far, we haven't seen it, and unfortunately, that means it's going into the live game with a lower level of certainty than the community would like. That's a big problem, guys. It's a big problem, but it's Blizzard's fault, unfortunately, because they don't give any money to StarCraft 2, and it's a bunch of volunteers doing it, and simply no one's getting paid to do it. And I've been trying to, come play a show match. I'm busy. I've got a tournament on this week. It's hard to get players out. And even if I did host 10 or 15 or 20 show matches, that's not really enough for the players to actually be iterating enough to properly be figuring out this patch. I could dump $10,000, $20,000 into tournaments. It's still not going to allow us to get definitive reads on whether a patch is balanced or not. You need the whole community really getting in there and grinding out the games. And I do believe if things are broken, we will be able to just hot fix in a few changes and just get that Cyclone back to its previous state, change these stats. I do believe that sort of stuff is very possible. So if things look really broken, I think we will be seeing a very responsive and hopefully much quicker response than we've seen in previous years in terms of Blizzard actually implementing the Balance Council's changes. So fingers crossed, my hopes for that stay true. We don't see a very unfair game. Protoss are still getting their ass kicked in PvT 3 weeks from now, a month from now, and nothing's happening, because that would suck. Let's talk about the Zerg changes a little bit. I haven't really been talking about that, but Zerg players, overall, I think Zerg got nerfed. Banelings are weaker, Lurkers are less mobile, Broodlords do a lot less damage, or at least the Broodlings both move slower and attack slower, which is a big part of the Broodlord's damage. The Broodlord's actual damage is not that big when it throws the Broodling into the enemy's face. It's the Broodling biting, or Broodlings, that tends to stack up the most damage. So the Broodlord's a little bit faster for it, but, essentially these late game Zerg turtle units are nerfed a little bit, and that does make a difference, right? That's kind of something that it makes an impact. It forces, arguably, Zergs to not go into a turtle late game scenario. This could be really big in of its own. That being said, a little bit slower move speed on the Lurker, not the end of the world. Broodlords, Broodlings doing a little less damage. Remains to be seen how big these impacts are in actual gameplay scenarios. I'm very unsure. Like I said, I need to see a lot of games with these to figure out how big they are. Really great change is banelings don't kill probes and drones so fast, and they have -5 hit points, which is friggin' crazy. That's the big one. That's the big one. I should show you guys on screen so we don't have to edit too much stuff in. I'm making work for my editors by just trying to not show stuff and show my stupid big face. So I actually really like these changes, guys. They're making it so that you don't get quite as much bonus damage, just a flat +2 rather than +2 verse, +2 and +2 verse light. So it means at +2 attack, you're only doing 39 damage rather than 41. It means you will not one-shot those enemy probes and drones, which is huge. I do think banelings, single baneling getting in a mineral line doing so much damage was a bit crazy before, but it keeps its interactions very similar versus most other units. Centrifugal hooks is made a little bit faster to upgrade and a little bit cheaper to compensate, but it also removes the +5 health bonus, which is a huge nerf against Marines specifically in Zerg versus Terran. I nickname this the Beyond buff, because guys that do really aggressive Marine tank timings where the Marines are trying to gun down the banelings before they connect, this specifically in those games is going to be pretty damn big. It might be okay. I'm not the biggest fan of mass baneling play myself. I think it's not the most exciting to watch, but it is something that Zerg needs to survive a lot of those push timings. And who knows, maybe every Zerg has to just play Roach Infester on the new patch instead of this. This is one of those changes, much like the Cyclone, where I'm like, this could really mess up balance. There's a lot of other changes. And it's the other thing, other than the Cyclone, that I'm worried about. I'm like, I don't know for sure. It shouldn't have gone through. As always, Starcraft's a complex game, and I always have a little bit of a wait-and-see attitude. A lot of people don't like that. They want me to say, no, shut up, pig. Just be confident and say, that's bad, this is bad, that's bad, this is terrible. You guys know I'm always a little bit more reserved because I understand that StarCraft is this interweaving, ultra-complicated mass, and over the years, there's been many times we made a change, and it made a very unforeseen change over there. Or there was a change we thought it was going to make, and there was a very easy solution in gameplay, which we didn't think of until after it was out there. But if I had my way, I'm basically in Harstom's school of thought, that's the most dangerous change along with the Cyclone. I'd probably take both of those away. We also have Ultras are cheaper, Hydras are faster. They're faster upgrades, and a bit cheaper upgrades as well. Infestors are way more accessible. At first, I thought this was a nerf because they lose 1 cast range on Fungal, and it goes from 30 down to 25 damage. After using them, I'm like, my Infestors are out like so much faster. Fungal still has the same area, and it's the ability to lock down a Terran's unit's ability to micro that is insane. I feel like Roach Infestor is better than it's ever been in Zerg vs Terran, and is a super viable style right now. Whereas before, it was a really niche thing I was doing for a long time, and I thought was just a meme build. Then Dark started doing it, and I was like, oh, a pro gamer's doing it. This is actually decent. And then Cyril started doing it and made it start looking actually broken and cracked. So I think we're going to see a lot more Roach Infestor ZVT. But I think it could be detrimental if baneling play just becomes like a super weaker style. You only see 1 in 10 games or something like that. I don't think that's something we want out of this patch. So if it goes that way, I do think that baneling minus hit point change has been a failure. I do not want us to remove baneling play from Zerg vs Terran. I don't want it to become a very niche play. It is the main way it's played right now, and there is a lot of very exciting back and forth games with Lingbane versus Bio. We don't want to lose that. So there's a lot of reworks here with Zerg. Arguably the biggest nerfs, but there's a few little buffs in there, minus 25 minerals per Ultralisk. I don't know how big that is. It's an ambitious set of changes. At the end of the day, we're going to have to wait and see how that works out. But like I said, if I was fully in charge, I'd take away the Cyclone change, take away the baneling change, and let it run. And I think I'd have a bit of an easier time seeing the impacts of all the other changes. Now this brings us into something where people are really friggin' pissed off. Fear Dragon had something to say. He said, I think BlizzCon patches were examples of refreshing things. Not just that they were radical changes, but they made players excited by what they could do. I think most people look at these patch notes and they felt outside of the Cyclone, maybe the Mothership, but hardly. This patch was reducing options for most players. Maybe pros feel different. At BlizzCon in the past, there would always be a post-BlizzCon patch after the World Championship. At one of them, they gave battle cruisers move and shoot. They gave automorph gateways to Warp Gate. They gave Nidus Worms unattackable. They gave Dark Templar Blink. Big changes that made people giddy with possibilities, not dreading things. I will say indirectly, the changes can enable things like Interference Matrix as an upgrade means maybe Protoss have more possibilities to opening because the Raven openings aren't as oppressive to kill Colossus. But non-pro players don't think about these things. Usually feel in games because they don't think about this because in games, in the low level, their gameplay isn't as refined with timings or as mapped out. You don't feel the impact of, oh, a few of my units got hit by EMP. I feel so empowered to do new things. Unless you're a fairly good player who can actually think of all the far-reaching consequences of the game that way. This is really cool because for years, yes, there was always an post-BlizzCon patch, and it had some of the coolest changes ever in StarCraft 2, guys. I am telling you, it was really fun every year, post-BlizzCon patch, and it was almost every time completely broken. We got many iterations of the Cyclone actually in those post-patches as well, where it was like just early Cyclone cheeses were actually running rampant. People did not like it unless they were using the Cyclones. There was also Burrow Fungal for a whole year, which was super broken. The moment it came out, I was like, this is the most broken thing ever. You're letting infestors move around while burrowed and cast spells. Why don't we just give a permanent cloak to a High Templar? The Dark Templar blesses it, becomes invisible. You've got an invisible Storm unit. Like, this is so stupid. It took 6 months until any pro used it, and then Dark started making some of the most disgusting comebacks anyone had ever seen, and they were like, oh, is this overpowered? And I was like, really? You think able to fungal your opponent's army? Fungal also had the radius of the sun. You don't realize, like there was so many things like that. They put Shredder Missile in, which is the anti-armor missile from the Raven, except it only cost 25 energy, which that sounds really good. Knocking armor off for 25 energy, yeah, and it did damage. It did 30 damage as well. So a full energy Raven could spam 8 30 damage rockets that were undodgeable. Were they undodgeable? Or maybe you could, I think they were completely undodgeable, or you at least you had to pull back like a screen to get away from it or something. So basically, this was my favorite age of playing Terran. Don't get me wrong, these toys were fun if you were playing with them. That was like, I was like the best I'd ever been at Terran, because late game, all I needed to do was make Thors, Hellbats, and I'd get like 30 Ravens, and any fight, all I had to do was spam missiles on my opponent, and I didn't need to micro anything else. It was so broken. Blink Dark Templar for the first like year was also insane as well, at least the first few months. I remember like TY was wrecking Zest, and like 6 Dark Templar just blink on his tanks from behind and killed 13 siege tanks and made like a really disgusting comeback. I saw that sort of thing happen a few times. We saw Blink Dark Templar. They had a very short cooldown on the blink as well. So you could blink up a cliff into their base, kill some stuff, blink back down as they scan and respond. They didn't have a delay on attacking after blink as well. So they would just like blink on a planetary and kill it. Now, don't get me wrong. These things were broken, but they were very fun. So I understand, and I agree, they were very fun and exciting. The difference is this was in a time when Blizzard had a lot of money going into StarCraft. Mike Morhaime was still at Blizzard. He was fueling money into his passion project of StarCraft that he loved so much. And the management there loved StarCraft, and they ran events. Every month or two, we'd get a balance post from a full-time employee at Blizzard or a team of employees, and they'd have super PR speak. We're listening to you guys. We hear people complaining about the Cyclone. It seems a bit too overpowered. I know the Dark Templar, it looks like it may be problematic. Every week or 2 weeks or a month, there is a new post being like, bam, this is what we're looking at. We realize this is a problem. We're thinking of addressing it with this. We're doing meetups with pros. We're sending spreadsheets out to the community and the pros to get feedback. And it was like this whole thing where even when things were broken, we felt like we were being listened to enough, and things were corrected whenever there were bugs, that it was kind of like, it was towing the line of making things fresh and fun, but also fixing things quickly enough and addressing them and not letting them fester for too long. So it was actually a very fun time in StarCraft 2's history, but it was also a time where that was possible because there was a lot of money going into it. And this leads into why we can't do the same thing in StarCraft 2 with the Balance Council in 2023. It's because communication is terrible from the Balance Council, guys. It's so bad. It's so bad. It's a bunch of volunteers who are just doing it in their spare time. There's like no resources from Blizzard pretty much. We also have a stupid NDA that makes it hard to talk about the specifics of things as well, though I don't know if I care too much about that, but every now and then I get warned or something that apparently I've made a mistake. It is what it is. So anyways, let's go back to a year ago, guys, a year and a half. This is April 2023. This video is called StarCraft's latest patch has failed. And it's me talking about how the patch is unambitious. It's making small changes that, whilst they're okay, aren't really addressing the root of certain problems or keeping the game fresh, and that there was no basically communication from the Balance Council whatsoever. So I'm like, what the hell? These changes suck. Look at how small these changes are. Kind of funny, right? Because now I'm on the Balance Council. They invited me after making this video. You know what was funny? Harston made a response to this video where he explained everything in the patch in painstaking detail. I did a follow-up video being like, oh, and then I'd watched a few more games on the balance patch and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that, you know, like I thought people weren't going ground for different reasons, but apparently it was Queen Walks would kill 3 Oracle into ground openings, so no Protoss could open up ground off Stargate. So that's why ground play was so rare, so they had to play the Void Ray. Basically, this patch was an amazing first sniper patch that the Balance Council did that actually completely solved ZVP, because it was a turtle fest up to this point, and the patch came out, and like I was kind of ranting about how I was like, look, pro players like DRG played, and he didn't even realize you can't transfuse off creep, and he was confused why his queens weren't able to transfuse in this GSL game while getting proxy tempested right after the patch came out. And I was just saying, like, no one even knows what's going on. The patch notes had no description. They're just like, it literally just said, this patch comes from the community. You can't see it up there. It's just scrolled up. I don't think I scroll up in this video, but it literally was like, oh, this is done by the community. We want to acknowledge the members of the group for the upcoming changes you see below. No explanation of the changes or anything. So since that time, the Balance Council has gotten better. They now have this Rentry post, which at least posts, there's notes on the impact this has. There's little light bulb things explaining why the changes are there. There's overall patch goals. So this is a massive step forward. Yet at the same time, people have not heard a lot of coverage, right? In the last month, no one's heard coverage from us about, hey, what are we changing? We thought you guys were showing us an early iteration, yet nothing changed in a month between the last version of the test mod and the current version. Like, what? We didn't hear any discussion. There was no extra explanation. And the problem is, it's no one's job to do it. I honestly didn't know how long Blizzard would take to put the patch in. I thought it would be another few weeks or a month out. And then it just like came out and I was like, the patch is out today? I was like, and I'm in the Balance Council. So you got to understand, like, I wish I did a video. I wish I was more prepared and more on top of reading everything going on in the Balance Council group. It's partially my fault, Harstam's fault, as people who are unpaid volunteers who step in and try to communicate the things we are allowed to communicate. But it definitely is a failing of communication in the Balance Council, and it's something that honestly I only see getting marginally better, like it has by having, you know, the notes written up there. I don't think it's going to get like insanely better because it's no one single person's job to do it, right? And I think we can do a better job. We'll keep trying to do a bit better. But I want to be realistic and say, like, I don't know if I'm going to be traveling to events sometimes, doing other things. Sometimes I'm not always keeping up to date with every little change going on in there. And there's always a bit of a, like, how long will it be from us coming up with changes to Blizzard implementing them is always a big question mark, depending on how busy their classic games department is. So, you know, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what's going on. This is kind of rambly at this point, but I hope I'm at least giving some insight into what's going on behind the scenes. At the end of the day, there's a lot of people in the Balance Council who kind of agree and negotiate on certain things. I have talked to people, and I do believe there is opportunities to hotfix changes, removing things completely or reverting them, possibly. Obviously, some people are saying like, hey, does the politics mean it'll look bad if we revert a change? I don't think that's the case. From the people I've spoken to at the Balance Council, I think most people are like, look, if something's bad, we just remove it. I think most people have that view, so I'm hoping that is what happens if we see issues pop up. If we do see these things be problematic. And don't get me wrong, people have been complaining about Widow Mines for 10 years. Blizzard never fixed it. Maybe if you stop being so rude to the Balance Council, there is a chance they will fix it. I personally am like, you know what? I would love to look at the Widow Mine. I would love to look at it. I'm going to start a lot of discussions around it during the next lead up to the next big patch we do and see if I can get people on board with maybe same damage in most scenarios, most situations, just maybe not one-shot workers. I think that would be cool to try out. There'd be a big change. I think it'd be cool to try out. You know, I'm going to push for things like that as well. Keep in mind, though, the Balance Council is very limited, sadly. At the same time, it's doing things that Blizzard could never do over its 11 years of balancing Starcraft 2 on its own. And there's been a lot of changes, fixing unit behavior and all sorts of little things that have had really positive impacts. At the same time, there's actually been a lot of really good feedback I've found in amongst the vitriol and hatred and emotional responses. There's been some amazing analysis and people who've really taken the time to write out reasonings, share replays, and give proper explanations of this impact affects this in this way, and this way. And I'm reading it, and I have to go down a thread in Reddit or something to find it. And I go, this is a great thread. This is actually really, I didn't think of this. And I often share those posts from YouTube comments, Reddit, I don't think I've ever done one from the BattleNet forums. I'm sorry, guys, but I share those in the Balance Discord. Whenever there's a really good point made in the community, I always share that in there. The changing the damage to mechanical on the Cyclone, I read that in the community. I saw that on a YouTube comment on a Hearthstone video, I believe. I posted it over there. Well, people said, hey, we're already doing that, actually. But that sort of thing has been happening a lot. So please, if you actually have solid thoughts about the game, keep sharing them. I would say the community is actually listening more than it ever has. You just won't hear many responses. So it's a little bit like going to the wise tree in the woods that you pray to for your ancestors. It's that Game of Thrones tree or whatever. You don't actually hear it speaking back to you. You just have to have faith. I know this sucks. It just is what it is. There's a lot to monitor, guys. I'm a little annoyed at the Cyclone and the -5 Baneling hit point, going through. I'm hoping they don't cause crazy problems. If they do, I will be pushing very hard for a follow-up patch removing just those 2 changes, or whatever makes sense in order to even out the balance and make things nice and fair. I do think PvT needs a boost for Protoss. I wouldn't mind a small boost for Protoss in PvZ as well. Nothing too crazy, but a small one. I don't think anyone disagrees on that in the Balance Council, really, or in the general community right now. Most people are like, hey, yeah, PvT, we want to make a little bit better. We'll see if these changes hit the mark or not. It's a lot at once, and I'm very excited to watch a lot of Starcraft over the coming weeks. Already playing on ladder, it feels like a whole new game. There's so many new strategies. The maps are wild. Having a 9-map map pool is insane. So thank you so much, everybody, for staying positive, the few of you that are, and sitting through such a rambly video. Thanks for watching, everyone. I love you all. Have a good one. We'll catch you in the next one. Let me know all your thoughts and comments below, and we might do a follow-up video if there's any changes. Thanks for watching. Goodbye and good night.